So today's webinar, I'm going to be chatting to Chris and answering people's questions on rent to rent. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to be asked that we're going to be able to answer. If you're interested in doing rent to rent, do not miss this webinar. So very good evening to you, Chris.
Good evening, Glenn.
Or Christoz. I never do know what you prefer to be called.
Well, as we're so close together right now, Chris is fine.
Okay, so this evening's theme is rent to rent, and I'm sure most people on here have got a very quick gist or rough idea of about exactly what it is. But would you like to just explain to anybody who might not know what it is, exactly what rent to rent is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a nutshell, it's where we take a property from a property owner for a period of time, and it can be pretty much any period of time, but typically within the rental world it's initially 3 to 5 years is the most sort of common figure to go for. This sort of makes it the most profitable. So after you've negotiated a deal with a landlord to rent their property for a 3 to 5 year period, you would then typically rent it out by the room and include the bills within the price of the room rentals. And the difference between your gross rent less your bills and the rent to the landlord will be your net profit. And if you do it in a very clever and well managed way, there's no reason why you can't be making between £800 and £1,200 for a typical 5-6 bedroom property.
And my tip for everyone is to do not undertake anything that doesn't have the potential at least £700-800 a month. I know historically of people who did it with £300-400 a month per property, and it just turns into a job because they never ever perform 100% of the time, 100% fulfilled till its full potential. So, minimum of £700 to £800. And just to give everybody an overview of what my clients have fairly consistently achieved. And it is one of the fastest ways to achieve financial freedom. Okay, so it's one of the fastest ways to achieve financial freedom, and people who need £3,000 to £4,000 per month to be financially free are achieving financial freedom through doing rent to rent within around 6 months. Normally it takes 2 to 3 months to get your first one, and that always seems to be the biggest challenge, but once you've got that one put to bed, it tends to accelerate from there. Not many people get 10 within 12 months, but quite a few of my clients have got, so when I say 10, I mean a £10,000 a month profit. See many of them get 10 grand a month profit within about 14-15 months. And obviously we've had Daniel Blacker and his dad and his brother he works with on here before, who has a cash flow of £17,000 a month from his portfolio. But Chris, tell us a little bit about you, because if somebody said to me, I'm going to talk to Chris about rent to rent, I'd be saying, how many rent to rent properties have you got? And from my understanding is you don't actually do rent to rent yourself, but you do provide rent to rent deals for finders fees for people. So especially people who are struggling to find one, or just don't have the time to find rent to rent deals, you go and find them for them. So you are fully accomplished of acquiring them and knowing how to do it and knowing the rules.
Yes.
And obviously you've also run quite a lot of HMOs, and you're totally up to date with the rules on all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise we wouldn't be chatting with you this evening. So tell us why you don't do them, but why you think they're worth it for some people.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, thanks, Glenn. As Glenn just mentioned, it is a fantastic strategy for anybody who wants to quickly replace their current income. So if you are, looking for £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 a month income, then there's absolutely no reason why you can't get to that figure in a relatively short space of time. Now, when most of you probably that have heard of me or met me before, you probably know me as Christoz, as in the property sourcer. So somebody who actually helps people build their portfolios, and that is, where I've been making a lot of money over the last few years. So because of that income, and because rent-to-rent strategy is really a low-cost entry point for very good returns when they're run well, there was never any need for me at any stage to really sort of go into it for myself. However, I have had a number of clients who have come to me with very little money, and so I've actually suggested to them that we help acquire properties for them on the rent-to-rent basis so that they can start off with a minimal amount of cash to get started. And so, for example, in the last 12 months, for a couple of different clients, I've now acquired around 12 rent-to-rents in the last 12 months. And one of those was actually during lockdown, which was a 9-bed, which produces more than £1,500 per month net. So, I have all the experience related to rent-to-rent and HMOs. One of the other services that we offer, rather than just finding them, is we'll also assist with actually doing any conversion work, any compliance work to make them HMO compliant, help with the application stage of the licensing. We'll even help as far as getting the property staged. So a lot of people don't have the time to do all these things, and so we just offer that service as an extra little bonus.
Okay, so Chris and I are going to carry on chatting for the next few minutes, but if you have any questions to ask Chris on rent to rent, please feel free to pop in the box, in the chat box, and type your questions, and I'll read them out and Chris will answer them as best we can. As we said, it is a very quick way of becoming financially free, and why anyone would ever continue working when strategies like this are available, I have got absolutely no idea. It's not something I recommend to my clients that have got a larger working capital, as there are, I believe, ways of making a lot more money a lot easier. But as I said, and I'm hopefully not putting anybody off, if you're prepared to work hard, normally up to around 10 properties you can manage yourself, as long as they're all in a reasonably close area. But once you get past that, 10 HMOs, 50 clients, you probably want to look at taking somebody on, because with 10 properties it becomes a job again, albeit a self-employed job. And when you start taking somebody on and they get up to speed, you'll end up with about £8 a month and no work to do, so you then truly financially free. So I'm waiting for some questions to be typed in here, because one of the hardest things I believe in rent to rent is getting from from letting agents a property without them or being able to answer their question when they turn around and say, why are you trying to sublet?
Yeah, so that's one of the most popular challenges that people get from agents in particular when they're dealing with that, sometimes even landlords themselves. So there are ways to legally be able to sublet, but you need the right documents and contracts in place to have the right framework to be able to do that. So, this is one of the reasons that, we're running a course on this, a one-day course in September, to really sort of get into a bit more of the nitty-gritty on, what sort of things you need to do. So it's not just about the documentation, but when you are dealing with agents, 9 times out of 10, they are going to be asking you challenging questions, and if you haven't got the right answers for them, it's going to be hard work for you to sort of get going on your own.
Yeah, I've had quite a lot of clients come to me and say, every time I go and speak to a letting agent, and I say I want to take on a property, what have you got available for rent? I can rent out the rooms. They look at them like they're mad. I always found it was far better to go in. So, for instance, with me, I particularly needed a property in an area where I was doing a development project. So I went to the letting agent and said, I'm looking for a property to house 5 Polish builders who are coming over from Poland to do my build contract just up the road.
Yeah.
And they totally got that then.
Yeah. Yeah. So outside of London, because in London a lot of the agents do get it already because there are so many room rentals already going on. So you'll find a lot more success, straight away with London agents because they understand the concept most of the time. But sort of moving outside of London, yeah, you're absolutely right. Effectively, some agents will look at that, and the way that Glenn's just explained that, and they'll consider that comes under the sort of corporate let umbrella. So you're renting it for one group of people that are, working for you, so you can effectively rent that property, from the agent or from the owner, let out the individual rooms to your staff. And as you say, letting agents understand that philosophy a lot better than
it becomes a company let. Otherwise, they would start wanting everybody to have their names on the tenancy agreement and all that type of stuff.
Exactly. So one of the things that can be done and does get done by a lot of landlords, if you've got a student HMO, for example, quite often they will put the students on one agreement because they're generally there just for one, educational year. So there are lots of little sort of ideas and loopholes and different ways of doing things, but you've got to think about who your end market is. Is it students? Is it working professionals in the area? Are you going to focus on tenants, on benefits? Are you looking at contractors in the area who are looking for sort of short-term 3 to 6 month lets? So really that's going to determine what area you go to, what angles you do and where you do your research.
Okay, right, Chris, I've got some questions start coming in, and Keith would like to know, can you do rent to rent with a house that's got 4 self-contained apartments plus garages, which is a bit of a weird one, because I would have thought that landlords, if they're self-contained, would just rent them out as 4 single lets. Obviously serviced accommodation jumps to mind, but he says also, if yes, do you need to pay the bills and the council tax?
Yeah, so we've just given an example of what the typical rent to rent looks like. So, quite often it's a 3 or 4 bedroom house, a couple of reception rooms, maybe a kitchen diner. So we're looking to convert some of those receptions into extra bedrooms and utilise them for maximum funds coming in on room rentals. Now, if a landlord has got a property and it's got already 4 self-contained units, maybe he's just a bit tired, maybe he's been managing themselves, and really what he's after is just somebody to take them off his hands, and he's happy to let them go for a reasonably lower rent than what he would be getting if he was doing it himself. So there are ways that you can take over a property. I wouldn't always guarantee that this is the best way to do it, but you could have a management agreement with them that states, for example, that you're going to pay them £1,000 every month or whatever the figure might be, and anything that you collect above that is your management fee. And therefore, if you decide to rent those out as individual units, they would normally pay their own bills on self-contained units, unless of course the electrics and things aren't divided, but you could put in a specific amount of electric. And if there's also garages, again, you could rent out those garages individually. And if you're doing all that work to get the fees, as long as you're paying a low enough rent, you've still got some profit in there. So it's down to you how much profit you're happy with on that particular deal.
Okay, cool, thank you. Right, Cedric says, what is the average cost per HMO to set it up?
That's a great one. How long is a piece of string?
So it depends whether you're doing slum landlording or you're doing high end, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a massive range.
Do you have a mini fridge with champagne in?
Yeah, exactly. So you could be going very low level, very basic, so for tenants on benefit for students, or you might be going for sort of the next level up, aiming at sort of contractors or sort of young working professionals, or you might be going a bit more high end. One of the properties I did not too long ago was actually a beautiful, lovely 4-bedroom detached house in a cul-de-sac, 2 receptions, big kitchen area, lovely garden, and you might look at that and think, well, to me that's not a HMO. Well, after we finished with it, it was a HMO, and we had premium rent on the rooms. We had people who were young working professionals, all earning between the sort of 30 to 60 grand type price, and they just wanted the prestige of living in a lovely house, and they didn't mind sharing a kitchen. You know, they did a lot of work. So it does really depend a lot on what you need to do to the property, what the location of the property is, and what standard you want to do it to. So it's a very difficult one to answer, but if I give you some rough figures based on, let's say, a 5-6 bedroom terrace property, and when I say 5 or 6, that's after you've converted some receptions into bedrooms. So you're going to need smoke alarms, you're going to need them in every bedroom, you're going to need a heat sensor in the kitchen and a smoke alarm in the lounge. You're going to need emergency lighting, you're going to need thumb turn locks on all the bedroom doors and the front door and back door. You're going to need fire doors on all the bedrooms and the kitchen. So basically there's a lot of cost involved there, and depending on the size, you know, if you're looking at a 5 or 6 bedroom house, those costs alone, without any, you know, refurb that might need doing or any other little bits and pieces you might need to do, that alone is probably going to set you back in the region of, you know, £3,500 to £4,500.
I've always said just allow £5,000, but then you're going to get some rent deposits back in, and if you use the tenants, the insured scheme rather than the tenants deposit scheme, then you'll get to keep the rents and get the rent money back in. Which what's an average deposit on a room rent now?
Again, varies from area to area. So some area where there's an oversupply of HMOs, which, you know, obviously we wouldn't advise you even go to those areas, because you want to go to the areas where the highest demand is there. But if there's a lot of demand, sorry, if there's not a lot of demand in that area, or there's an oversupply, there are many people advertising their rooms with no deposit. So, you know, you need to focus on the areas where there is average to good demand, and there's no reason why you cannot charge anywhere from £100 or £200 up to a whole month's rent. But when you get to doing a whole month's rent as a deposit and the month's rent, then you're getting into the territory where people are probably umming and ahhing, well, maybe I should just try and find a studio apartment. So, you know, you've got to be a little bit flexible on that. One of the tricks that we quite often do if we take on a new property is we will actually do a promotion of some kind in the first month to fill it in the first month, and that might be a very low or zero deposit, or something special with the rent for the first month.
Well, I've always worked on, especially when we get larger properties, you know, with 10, 15, 20 rooms, is working on what I just call the EasyJet policy.
Yeah.
Where, you know, the first 10 people that rent it out may get half price or a third off their rent for 3 months. Yeah. Just that gets it filled up fairly quickly, you know, other than having it sitting around and just half the room's void for the first few months.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd much rather give away a room for virtually nothing for the first month to, you know, get someone signed up on a 6-month AST with the hope that they may stay longer than that 6 months. But it just means the cash flow's coming in straight away. You're not trying to hold out for top dollar price for 3 months and half your rooms are still empty, and then you're not cash flow.
Okay, so Joanna would like to know, would you set up a company to take on rent-to-rent properties?
You don't need to. However, if you're going through agents, it's probably advisable to be that little bit more professional. There's companies online where you can actually incorporate a brand new limited company for $9.99, so why wouldn't you? You know, just makes you a little bit more professional, a little bit more stable, and more likely to be able to do business with not just agents but even owners will take you more seriously if you've got a limited company.
Okay. Can you include a delayed completion with rent to rent up to the completion date? So Keith, that really is then called a lease option, because you would have an agreement to rent the property for a period, and you can buy it at the end. Now the option determines that whether you want to or not, but if you actually did a delayed completion on an exchange, then you would have to, unless it's a conditional exchange. So yeah, there's nothing to stop you doing a deal with a landlord where you rent it for a certain period of time and then buy it. Nothing at all, it's just down to negotiation.
Yeah, and on that subject of lease options, the great thing is that we do very often is we'll find a rent to rent, and if the landlord has been advertising it for sale as well as rent, we'll quite often offer him a price to buy it at some point in the future, and we'll actually tie that into the rent-to-rent contract. So effectively we're doing a lease option and a rent-to-rent at the same time. So should we decide at any point during that contract we want to buy it, we can do it at the pre-agreed price at day one.
Kevin would like to know what your fees are for finding a rent-to-rent deal, and would like to know what areas you would do it in.
Okay, so my fee is typically £5,000 for a 5-year contract. That's something that should be aiming for around £800 plus on net profit based on our calculations. I cover lots of different areas, so it depends really on whether it's something you want to self-manage. I'm not going to suggest you try and self-manage it remotely. You probably want to be within an hour drive of where that is. So by all means send an email to Glenn. Glenn can send an introduction to myself and we can talk about areas and ideas on that based on what you want to do, self-manage, or you get someone to do it for you.
Okay. Fitzroy says, how difficult is rent-to-rent in terms of, I think he says replacing tenants. It's no different really, Fitzroy, to running an HMO, because it's exactly what you are doing. So it's going to be very much in different areas. There's higher demand, and if you set it up right in the first place and you get it dead right, if somebody's giving you notice and you know they're moving out, the chances are that you can get a team go in on the day they move out and clean the room and get it all ready for the next person to move in on that day if you're running a very tight ship. Something I know, even with replacing like tenants moving out of whole properties, something that I used to do when I was involved with running a whole portfolio of over 200 properties. So
so on that, again, it really depends on who you're dealing with. So if you decide that students are your tenant, most students do an academic year. So, they're not likely to just be in and out in 3 to 6 months. They're likely to be there for the whole academic year. If you're aiming at working professionals, they may be there 6 months, 12 months or longer. And if you're aiming at tenants on benefit, I've got a friend who specialises in that, and he gets what he calls the black bag brigade. So they turn up with a black bag, they've been kicked out by the other half, and they need a room just for the week while they patch up with the missus, and then 5 years later they're still there. So, it just really depends on who your target audience is, who your tenant's going to be, as to what the turnover is, and also, as Glenn said, the area that you're in, because some areas will turn over those rooms a bit quicker than others.
Okay, so Dominic says, when is a rent-to-rent then perceived as an HMO? Aren't you better off taking advantage of significant tax savings doing rent to serviced accommodation? I'm not sure what you mean about the tax savings.
Okay, so you may be getting confused with capital allowances, which is to do with service accommodation if you're purchasing the property. But if you mean something else, then let me know. But as far as rent to serviced accommodation goes, it's pretty much the same concept as rent to rent, except for instead of using the property for renting the rooms out on a HMO basis, you're actually using it for serviced accommodation purposes. Okay. So it could be a holiday destination, a tourist destination, it could be an area where there's a lot of contractors working that need short-term lets. They don't want to sign up for a 6-month AST on a HMO, but they're happy to do 1 week or 1 month at a time serviced accommodation level.
The biggest challenge you've got with that is if a landlord's happy to let you take on the property as an HMO and they're aware of it and they insure it accordingly, you're not technically allowed to rent the rooms out on short-term lets, because otherwise it puts the landlord in breach of their mortgage. Obviously if you're taking over a guest house, then a guest house is short-term service accommodation, and that's exactly what it is. So you've got to be very, very careful when it comes to service accommodation, and lots of people are doing this, and lots of people are probably not aware that it will invalidate their HMO insurance if they've bought the property on an HMO mortgage and they've got HMO insurance and they're renting out properties on a short-term basis. It can invalidate the insurance, so if there's a fire, the insurance company will not pay out.
Yeah. So just to add to that, one of the things that we'll cover on the course on the 13th of September is really just understanding the difference between normal rent to rent, rent to service accommodation, what you have to have in place with the owner of that property regarding their mortgages, insurances, all these little things that most people just don't think about, but you need to cover your backside and make sure that you've got all the boxes ticked.
Okay, so Elford said, I've got my own property with 3 bedrooms, 1 large and 1 suite, good sized living room plus a small extension garage room. That is small. What is the minimum room size? Okay, the minimum room size will vary from council to council. I think it's about 6.5 metres.
Yeah, so
standard.
It's the national UK standard is 6.51 metres squared for a 1-person occupant room for an adult. So as long as the room is that size or larger, then you can rent that out to 1 person. If you're deciding you want to rent to a couple, that will generally not be big enough. Typically for couples on most councils will be wanting in excess of 10 square metres. So check your local council websites on their HMO regulations, because they all have a slight variation when it comes to things like communal space, room sizes, etc., based on the number of people in the property, and so you've got to take all these things into consideration.
Yeah, I've had HMOs before where we've had to move a wall over by 6-8 inches, which is rather aggravating.
And rather expensive.
Yeah, well, it's a few grand, yeah. So, and if you look at that in terms of profit, it's a few months' profit. So Alfred said, I've got my own this 3-bed property. Now, the only thing is, I would say, Alfred, it sounds like you've got 4 rooms plus the garage. And personally, I would not rent out or run an HMO unless it's a high end and they've all got en suites. I wouldn't run a 4-bedroom property like that. You'll find that there's not at least £800 profit in it. If you do your maths, it just doesn't work. You've then asked how much do you turn in for the rent you charge for each room. You need to do research. I'd go on to one of the portals,
yeah,
like Find a Room or whatever.
Yeah, a spare room's probably one of the biggest ones at the moment, so you can get a good idea on demand there. There's also Easy Roommate, which is probably the sort of 2nd largest in the UK at the moment.
And I'd just pretend I'm looking for a room myself and make some phone calls and shop around and find out what you're going to get and how much you're going to pay.
Yeah,
and if
absolutely.
you want to fill up a property fairly quick, be £5-10 under that.
Yeah.
But put it back up after 3 months.
Yeah, and one of the things which is sort of detracting slightly, but when you're looking through those pictures, you'll very quickly see the people that are good at doing this and the people that aren't. So the rooms will be well presented and well photographed, or they'll just be bare beds looking awful, dark and dingy. So spend, it's probably not going to cost you more than £100 to get your whole room fully professionally photographed, top to bottom, inside and out, and that £100 will sell your rooms fast if you presented them well.
And you can use it again and again each time tenants move out.
Exactly.
As long as you keep the same stuff. Okay. Okay, so Alfred also says, what's the best way to work out high demand?
Yep, so just go on spare room. This will be the initial thing to do. Go on spare room, and on there you'll see the numbers of people in that postcode area that you've typed in that are looking for rooms, and also the number of people that are offering rooms. So sometimes those numbers may be very similar, sometimes one of those numbers will be a lot higher than the other. So that'll give you an instant guideline, an instant sort of rough position. The second thing I would do is I would then actually phone some agents in that area that specialise in HMOs. So don't just phone the normal buy-to-let letting agents, that do the family lets. Find out who the specialists are in the area for HMOs, give them a call, pop in and see them, have a friendly chat with them, and just basically milk them for information and find out, what is in demand at the moment and how are things going for them for business, and just see, is there still a good demand in that area or not.
And obviously if there's lots of properties or rooms available in the area, it may not be that there's a higher demand, and if you can't find one at all, then there probably is. Okay, Ron says, how do you get around when letting agents say they don't do subletting? I think we covered that earlier, but we can go over it again.
Yeah, so very simply, just to have a short, simple conversation with them and say, look, we've done this before, and we are a professional company. We have all the right legal framework and contracts in place to be able to do this. There's no subletting, regulations broken. We'll do this all above board. Now, normally that would be enough for most agents. Some of them then may go to the next stage and say, well, can you explain a bit more? Can I see a copy of the contract? If you're at that point of negotiation, hopefully you've already got a contract ready to go anyway. If not, then I suggest you get one drafted up by a property professional lawyer that deals with these things, not just your typical lawyer on the high street.
Okay, James says, in the current COVID-19 situation, how are you letting properties on a room-by-room basis with social distancing rules, etc.?
Okay, so very good question. The same way that everybody else is renting out houses and flats and rooms and everything else. So agents have to stick to all the current COVID rules, basic stuff, gloves, masks, sanitizer, this sort of stuff. They will typically open the front door, open the rooms of where you're looking in, and allow you to enter the property, doing the social distancing, and allow you to view all the property as normal. So, we're taking all the agents that are doing this that I've met in the last few weeks have all been doing it by the book. They've turned up with their mask. I've got my mask on because I'm viewing the properties and they are showing me the properties. They're keeping their distance from me, and it all works fine. It's the same as when you go and shopping. I think we've just had an introduction of face masks in all shops now. I think from what I've seen, not everybody's adhering to that yet. But on the agent front, I've certainly not had any agents turn up without at least a mask on.
So when it comes to shopping and you have to wear a face mask, do you have to wear a face mask when you're online shopping?
Yeah. Only if you want to be trendy and fashionable and have a colour coordinated one like me.
Okay, Fitzroy, I think he's referencing you finding properties for people. He said you manage these properties as well.
No, I don't do any management anymore. So what I do for my clients is I will introduce them to a local HMO specialist agents in the area that we are working. If you require me to find something in an area where I've never worked before, typically I will interview the top 3 or 4 companies and I will introduce you to the one I feel is most appropriate and best suited to you.
Okay, I'm just answering somebody on here. So what's the traction for JV partners with rent-to-rent deals? So Alpha, there's quite a lot of people who want to get into rent-to-rent, but they don't have the £4,000 or £5,000 needed for the first deal. So for them, they look for JV partners, and then the JV partners put the money in. The JV partners don't do any work, and normally there's some sort of agreement about getting half the profit. So literally, the JV's person supplying the cash will get a return on their money and not have to do any work, and the person that's doing all the work is getting half the money but not putting any money in. So that's kind of what the attraction is, and there are pretty much always people who are willing to put money into deals, and I know there's pretty much always people who are looking for money for deals. So whatever side you're on, I'm sure you can find what you're looking for if you look in the right places. Right, Angeli says, hi Christoz, what happens if you have trouble filling rooms and run voids all the time?
Then you didn't do your research and your homework very well in the first place. So spank your hand.
Careful.
And I just realised we're on camera. Okay, so yeah, you need to do your research at the front end, at the end of the day, and if you don't and you find that you are having problems, there's one of a couple of things it's likely to be. One is you've chosen a crap area where there's not enough demand, so hence spank the hand. The other one is you've maybe just not got very good photos, or you haven't presented the property very well. So it's very easy to dress a property. Normally you're providing these rooms on a furnished basis, and it's very easy to just go and buy a nice duvet set and some cushions and pillows for the purposes of the photograph. You don't have to leave them there after the room is let, but you can use that for staging the property, making it look pretty.
And a rug and some pictures and some flowers.
Yeah,
even artificial flowers. Yeah.
Exactly, artificial flowers. So we put pictures in all of the rent-to-rents that we do that colour coordinates with the cushions on the bed in addition to the pillows, and then we'll have a throw that colour coordinates with that as well.
In fact, so if you get it right, and Chris was in the room in the jacket that he's wearing tonight, you wouldn't actually see him.
I blend in with that's it. I blend in with the colours.
So it was a cushion cover.
So yeah, that's the other thing. Get good photos, present it very well. If you've chosen a bad location, as in an area where the people just don't want to live there, that's because you didn't research it. So just consider those options before you get stuck in and start negotiating. Check it all out thoroughly before you start.
Or it might even be that you're £5 too much.
Yeah, that's it. Always check the pricing as well, because if you are trying to get a premium and you're holding out for that premium, I'd rather let it go.
In the long run, yeah.
That's it. Take 25% off. Take 50% off just for a short period, like the first month special offer. I have let rooms at the worst possible time of year, going into the beginning of December, and I've let all 6 rooms in a 6-bedroom HMO off scratch within 24 hours. So if you want to know how to do that, you come and see me in September, and I'll tell you the secrets on that.
Now, I also know somebody who had a property on the market for £4,000 a month, had several offers of £3,500 which they turned down, and 12 months later they still hadn't rented the property.
Yep.
Which to me is total madness.
And I've done exactly the same thing. I've offered on properties like that where they are asking too much rent. I've offered them a realistic market value rent to take that property on a rent to rent. They've turned it down, and then, like say, 6-12 months later, they still haven't rented it. They've lost all that money that they could have had, and they come back and they say, well, look, can you pay $3,750? I'm like, no, it's $3,500. That's what the offer is.
Okay. So there was a question earlier on about tax and stuff with service accommodation, and what somebody's just replied in and said, Ron, thank you. That section 24 doesn't apply for service accommodation. So that's assuming that Ron's correct on that one. I've got no reason to think it isn't right. That's what was meant by that, so I understand now.
Okay, yeah, that makes it a bit clearer on the last question. Thank you.
Okay. So, in fact, that was the question up there. Yes, depending was if I'm a renter. Yes, so for self-contained apartments would make sense if you can claim the mortgage relief on it as a serviced accommodation, to run it as a serviced accommodation rather than have 4 flats rented out full-time on HMO.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
cool. Right. And Dominic says yes, it was related to capital appreciation, capital allowances. Right. Fitzroy said, when we run our rent-to-rent day, is it going to be on Zoom? Yes, Fitzroy, it will be.
99% certain we'll still be on Zoom at that point. It's the 13th of September, which is a Sunday. Good news with the Zoom ones is you don't have to travel anywhere.
No, we would appreciate some feedback, because what we're looking at when it comes to Zoom or being present is that there are some hotels which are renting out rooms, like for weddings, 30 people maximum, 30 people in a room maximum, because we've had some agencies contact us about renting rooms from hotels, but people have to be 2 metres apart on their chairs. So I'd like some feedback whether you would rather be present and be one of the people that can ask lots of questions, or be on a Zoom and just have the chance of listening to the questions that other people ask. So that would be good to get some feedback on that one, please. Angeli says, what is the most efficient avenue to find tenants?
Well, it depends on your tenant profile. We discussed earlier a few options. So you've got students, you've got people on benefits, you've got contractors, you've got young working professionals, you might have a very high-end property. So really you've got to think about who your tenant profile is, and then you're going to be able to figure out a lot easier, where they are. Students is obviously very easy because students will be going to the usual places like the I'm trying to think what they call it now. What's the students' union help? I can't think what it's called, but most universities have a housing department.
It's just a long while since you've been a student.
Yeah, a very long time. Thanks for reminding me. Even shorter than you, but
You're referring to the time since I was in university, am I right?
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
Okay, so
when people call me shortly,
that's it.
See you shortly.
Surely you don't mean that. Okay, so students is easy. They typically at most universities will have a housing department that the students will be able to be contacted through that method. I would suggest actually getting in contact directly with that housing department within the university, explain what you've got to offer and see what opportunities they have. They might be able to send out one of your flyers in their letters to students. They might be able to advertise on their website, or there's a number of possibilities you could do there. If you're working with tenants on benefits, you might look at speaking to some of the local housing associations and seeing if you can offer some rooms that way. If you're working with contractor level type rooms, then again go and visit the local building sites that are going on. Someone's building up a new Amazon nearby, go and have a chat with the floor manager, the site manager, and just say, do any of you guys want a reasonably priced room for 3 months if they're working here long term? It's all about communication. So think about who your tenant profile is, think about where they're going to be and how they're going to find out about you, and just go direct to the source and start speaking to people.
Okay, Peter says, is it possible to run an HMO from afar? Or would you need to use a letting agent, or is something if you want to run properly you have to run yourself?
You certainly could run it at Afar. I wouldn't recommend it, because if you're going to do the viewings yourself, you're going to have to be very, very organised, maybe 1 or 2 days a week to do a block viewing and get 6-7 people turn up on the same couple of hours. Otherwise, if you're living several hours away and you're having to fly up and down the motorway every day, then you might as well just get a job in London and commute backwards and forwards to London. So I wouldn't recommend it. It's not the easiest thing to do. You can manage it afar with a letting agent, or you could find a local part-time agent to help you. So some of my clients, after they've gone from self-managed to letting it out, they don't always go straight to an agent. Sometimes they'll hire a part-time property manager. So that property manager is looking after the, controlling what needs to be reported on repairs, doing viewings for new tenants, checking out tenants that are leaving, and they do that for them for a fee. And that probably works out a little bit cheaper than having a full management company do it for you.
Okay. Lorna, you've given me a bit of an essay here. Let's start off with the first thing. If you do rent to rent, does the property need an HMO licence?
Okay, so that's quite a long, complicated answer on its own. So first thing is, if you've never heard of Article 4, it's simply something that a lot of councils have been implementing in areas where they feel there's too many HMOs. So a lot of areas around the country have got what I call a HMO ban. So they'll have, typically on the website, there'll be a map of whether it covers the whole of that town or city, or whether it's certain roads. So have a look on the local council website based on where you are to see.
Don't you have to get a licence once it's over a certain number of people now?
Yes, so if you have 2 or more unrelated families or people living in the property, you will need a licence in most councils.
The councils actually describe it as exchanging bodily fluids.
Yeah.
Which is how they define.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that's strictly true, because if you were living with a daughter or a son, that's not sure that's necessarily accurate. But so look on the council website, see if it's Article 4. If it is, see which areas are covered, and see if it's worth you doing in that area. Now, if there is 5 or 6 people, you will definitely need a license in all areas, and some areas charge different prices as well, so again you need to look at that. If you want to put 7 people into a property, when you get to 7 and above, then you're looking at a whole different thing altogether. So before you can even apply for a license, you have to do a planning application, and it's based on sui generis, which means that you are doing something out of the ordinary, and you are basically taking 7 people into one property. So they want you to apply for planning to get permission to do that. Once you've got the planning accepted, if you get the planning accepted, then you would ask for the license for the HMO. Hopefully that covered that question in fairly simple terms.
And have you heard of anybody who's had a change of use granted but then not been given a licence?
I haven't personally heard of it, but it can quite easily happen. So just be very careful.
Okay, right. When there's loads of work to do in a house, do you put tenants in ongoing, or only when the house renovations are complete? I would say, Lorna, if you're renovating the property and you're doing the communal areas, I'd do the communal areas first. If you're done at them and you're only down to do the bedrooms, then you could do the bedrooms one at a time, and when a few of them are done, start renting them out. Obviously, workmen are going in the house and making lots of noise. You've got to kind of take that into account. Lorna then goes on to say, I have a tenant who, even though I had planned to go collect rubbish, refused me early entry yesterday, slammed the door shut and blocked my way. Also threatened to change the front door lock, and when I did insist on going in to do my planned rubbish clearance, she proceeded to follow me, claiming that she didn't trust me.
Yeah, so it's very unfortunate that you've got a tenant that feels that way. However, if you've got the right agreement in place, you do have absolutely the right to give them 24 hours notice to come into the property for any reason.
But that's their rooms. You've got the right to go into communal areas anytime you want. If you own them.
Yeah, but also all HMOs are subject to inspection, not just from the local council, but from you as the HMO manager, or by the owner, or if you're taking on a HMO management company, by them. So again, that should all be written into your agreement to clearly state you will be doing regular inspections. You will give them at least 24 hours notice, which is the minimum legal requirement, unless it's an emergency. So you have every right, as long as you've got those things covered in your contract. They should not be standing in your way and stopping you. Obviously, some people will be cautious because they will feel that maybe their stuff's going to get stolen. So you should be flexible enough to say, well, look, I'm happy to come when you're present and do the rubbish collection or whatever it is you need to do when they are present. So they have every right to walk around with you and watch you if they feel that you might steal something.
I've nearly always found that when somebody's like that, it's because they've got something to hide. And it's not very often that within an HMO people grow cannabis or anything like that, because all the other people in the other rooms would smell it. But there are times when that person is doing something that they shouldn't.
Maybe the tenant's just insecure, or maybe they just have had a bad experience in the past. So don't take it personally. You just need to clarify with them what's in the agreement, and that you do have the right to do this, and you're happy to be flexible when they're there and come and visit when they're there.
Okay, right, we've got time for a few more questions. So if we can go to kind of one sentence answers, that would be great, because we've got a lot of questions left. What's the most efficient avenue to find tenants?
Okay, well, we just mentioned that a minute ago, but one of the other things you could do, depending on your tenant profile, which I mentioned, students and contractors, working professionals, tenants on benefits. So, think about who your tenant profile is, and then think about where you can connect with them. The easiest way is to just set up an account on Spare Room and do an advert, and it's a paid advert, but if you've got some professional photos and you've got an advert on there, the phone's going to start ringing if you've done your research, and you'll start to fill it up very quickly.
Ilford says, which contracts do you use? And I'm pretty sure that Chris would be more than happy to share them with anyone who comes on the training day.
Yeah, we're going to go over, on the training day, we go over the two main types of contracts to use. One is the management contract that I mentioned earlier, which is sometimes appropriate. However, personally, I always use a non-standing Housing Act agreement. That gets very, very detailed into what I can and cannot do with that property, including letting it out as HMO rooms. So that's personally how I do it, because that's the best way to stay compliant and within the boundaries of the law, but there are multiple ways to do it.
Okay, what is the bathroom to bedroom ratio for an HMO from Bev? I used to, most of my properties had 3 bedrooms, 2 receptions, 1 bathroom, and then 1 kind of downstairs cloakroom. So, there's 1 bath stroke shower for everybody to use. If a house, normally when we're refurbishing a property and the bathroom and the toilet are separate, if you run it as an HMO, I would leave them as separate. But that's kind of the ratio. I don't think the council have got anything particularly specified there more.
Yeah, so it's slightly different with each council, but as a general rule of thumb, if you've got 4 people in there, you'll need 1 full bathroom. If you've got 5, you'll typically need an extra WC, and if you've got 6, then most councils will jump then to 2 shower rooms or 2 bathrooms. When you go over 6, then the numbers will increase when you get to 7, 8, 9, 10, but you can check on the council website for the local area that you're looking at, and they'll give you the exact numbers per person.
And one of my clients, I know, is doing a 52 room one, and they're having to have multiple kitchens in as well, yeah. So there's different things to look at. Cedric says, what happens if you rent a room to an individual and a couple end up moving in? Basically, that's in breach of the tenancy. I don't actually like, even if a couple wanting to move in, as far as an HMO is concerned, I don't like couples living in rooms, because they tend to argue because they're in a small space, and when they argue it upsets the other tenants and you have all sorts of problems. So,
and that's a similar experience to what I've experienced in the past. So I generally, a long time ago, I'm talking about now with HMOs, but regarding, if you're doing a rent-to-rent HMO, I would probably stick with individuals per room. One of the other things with couples, other than the sort of arguments, is even if they're not necessarily the first couple in there, if they are the only couple in there, it's like, well, there's 2 of us, we get 2 votes, we rule the roost. And then that just antagonises other tenants and puts them off, and people leave. So, most of the time I would probably suggest focus on single room occupancies if you can. If it doesn't work for you that way and you've got to look at other options, then just vet them very carefully and see, if you can actually make sure that they're going to be compatible with the other people in the house.
Nika, I think it's pronounced Nika. How do we get these partners for JVing with rent-to-rent deals? Normally, on our training days, whenever we've run courses, especially the face-to-face ones, we have a show of hands from people who are looking for somebody else to do it, that've got money, and we have a show of hands from people who've got time and no money, that are looking for partners. So we quite often, and I'm sure we can do the same on the Zoom day, we partner them up. So, I'm pretty sure we can do that. Ron says, would you manage the rent-to-rent yourself or give it to a management company? Personally, I wouldn't be seen dead managing tenants. I hate them people. I've always professed to say that buy-to-let would be absolutely ideal if we didn't have to have tenants. Not saying everybody's a pain in the backside, but the last few years I had my portfolio. I wasn't managing any of them and never knew any of my tenants, or ever met any of the tenants and didn't want to. But when you're first starting, you may not have a choice. So it is a personal preference whether you give it to a management company or manage it yourself.
Yeah, and if you negotiate a really good deal and you can afford to pay a management company, then why wouldn't you?
Jason says, how much do you normally spend to fit out each room? It depends how high end you're trying to make it. It's probably somewhere around 300 quid a room to put in a bed, mattress, bedside tables, wardrobe, if you're using low end stuff. So yeah, that was about where it was. And Palmetto said, what's the cost of the course in September, assuming it's going to be face to face? Normally Palmetto, if it's face to face, it would be
£395 plus that.
£395 plus that, and if it's on Zoom, it's
97 plus that.
97 plus that.
I know which one you're going to vote for now.
So yeah, let's have some votes. Right. Look, we've come to the end of this evening. We've run out of time. If you would like Chris to come back and chat to you about the rent stuff in a month's time or something like that, please just send a message to info@glenarmstrong.com. We've got Rick Manzanero tomorrow night. Rick is one of my very first clients who has never really pushed the boat out. He's got a small portfolio in London. He's been financially free for some time. Interesting character, used to work for the BBC doing filming. He actually is known for doing the Walking with Dinosaurs films. So it was great to chat to. And he not only is financially free, he's now a millionaire and is my 86th client who we've found to become a millionaire through my training. So I'm going to be chatting with him tomorrow evening, and he's going to be available to answer any questions that you've got from somebody who has gone from pretty much nothing to building up and owning a portfolio and has become a millionaire through it. So he's going to be chatting on tomorrow evening. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Chris, for helping out and answering everybody's questions.
Pleasure, as always.
So I look forward to speaking to you all again tomorrow evening. Have a great evening. Please don't get complacent about things going on out there. I understand that Spain's now locked down again. So still take care, and I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow. Have a good evening.